have, I think, 1, 3. Okay, we'll start over there.
My question is on the problem or on the issue on anonymity. We already had this split in the Bitcoin community with the block size debate, which might to some seem like a controversial issue, but in my notion, we might have the same split or like a worse split again once we talk about merging anonymity techniques into Bitcoin.
I'm sorry, merging what?
Anonymity mechanisms, because they tend to be more controversial. What do you think about this? Is this going to lead to another split, or is it even important?
I don't think it would lead to a split, because the way that Bitcoin's incentives work are such that you're really very strongly incentivized to stay on the main chain, because defecting is highly costly. And I think Bitcoin Cash, in fact, the success of the Bitcoin Cash split you might argue that, okay, that shows that we can have more splits. I'd say it would be the opposite, because Bitcoin Cash had something like, 80 or 90% of manufacturers of mining equipment behind it, and it had a lot of old-time Bitcoiners and a lot of resources, and yet it struggles to hold 10% of the Bitcoin price, So, if this is the definition of success of a split, this is only going to make it less likely for people to want to split. And I think in the future, people are going to want to stick to whatever is most likely to not cause a split. So this is just in general on the split issue. Now, in terms of the anonymity, I'm not entirely sure how things are going to evolve, but I'm not entirely sure that anonymity is going to be feasible on the first layer of the blockchain. It's just, at the end of the day, you see the transactions, every single transaction is there, and then blockchain analytics, they can't prove that this coin is yours, but sometimes they can, sometimes they can't, but there's a lot of headway to be made just by observing the public data on the blockchain, and it's only going to get better with time as we identify more coins and identify more addresses and so on. So anonymity, in my opinion, I don't think is going to be very feasible to achieve on the blockchain level. And this is one of the reasons why I think, all of these anonymity coins like Zcash and Monero are extremely misguided in their technique, because, a blockchain is a permanent record. That's the last thing you need to do, if you want something to be anonymous, It's a record that continues to exist there. So, you're starting at a severe disadvantage. If your goal is anonymity, don't start with a blockchain. Don't start with a centralized system where every transaction is recorded, because that makes it very easy to track back. So then adding anonymity onto the blockchain, I think, is going to likely be hard. But I think the possibility for it is going to be on second and third layers. And this is, to go back to the issue of my book, I think, in fact, the lack of anonymity in Bitcoin might actually be a good thing if you think of it as the Bitcoin blockchain itself as a settlement layer. Well, then the transparency would be ideal. Maybe the best thing to do is we have, say, 5,000 central banks around the world, and all of their transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain, they're the only people who deal on Bitcoin, the blockchain, because you and I can't afford the transaction costs. They do all of their transactions on it, and everybody knows all of these things. But then you can have your own bank account at an anonymous bank, and that bank just simply doesn't disclose your own data, and that's it. They do all of their payments on second layers, and I think the market is perfectly capable of providing genuine privacy solutions on second layers, particularly after everything we've been hearing over the last couple of years. I think this, this is a great opportunity for Bitcoin payment processors to offer themselves as second layer anonymity. Come and get an account with us and nobody will ever find out, as opposed to all of the current government influenced tech companies that are just always using their data to spy for the sake of government.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Okay, so first of all, I think you made some good analogies between multiple projects competing under different governance schemes that you outlined, like centralized organizations with single leaders or decentralized organizations. I think just like Bitcoin is competing with the classical monetary system, Bitcoin has to compete in a sense of governance models competing against each other, and we will see which will be the one who follows through. So in your last answer about anonymity, of course fungibility is a great positive factor for any currency. There are a lot of doubts that a second layer solution can really provide all these benefits without going through some serious slippery slopes. So second layer solution, for example, in the past we had the gold standard, of course, and the second layer solution was to the classical banking system as Giralgeld, money that was issued by private banks. So everybody was still thinking they are on the gold standard, whereas on their second layer they really weren't anymore. Yeah? So and in the Bitcoin system we had a very similar slippery slope when before Mt. Gox went down. People were upset with the 10-minute intervals and they started to accept Mt. Gox codes instead of real Bitcoins. So I think most of the second layer solutions that I have seen, or actually all of them, have great potential for them to be a substitute for on-chain payments. And on-chain payments today defines the value of a Bitcoin, because I'm only accepting a payment in Bitcoin today with an on-chain payment. But if I would accept a payment, for example, as a database entry at the provider, then this provider would immediately get the power to print more Bitcoins, basically to bring more Bitcoins into circulation and thereby diluting the money supply. So do you think this is a real potential that second layer solution will actually bring a dilution of the money supply and bring the same problems that we had back in the gold standard back into Bitcoin?
This is an excellent question, and it's not one that I can obviously answer directly. I can't say yes or no because we're going to have to find out over time. But here's the sort of counterpoint for why I think it won't be as big a problem on Bitcoin as it was on gold. Because of the fundamental nature of the blockchain where all of the coins are known. So if you're thinking about second layer solutions, you know, the payment provider will have a public address that is known. So then it's you know, compare that to the situation of a bank that has a vault that you can't check and you don't know how much gold they have there, but they're issuing notes and issuing notes for circulation. So the advantage, of course, is Bitcoin. You can track all of the Bitcoins and you can know how much Bitcoins they have in cold storage, and then you can see what their notes are circulating, how many notes they have. So that would allow people to first know if this is going to happen or not. Now, some of the pro-fractional reserve banking economists will tell you that they would expect this to develop on Bitcoin and that it is no problem. My feeling is that no, it won't develop simply because if you were a second layer solution provider and you started providing your inflated Bitcoin, like let's say you have 100
loans or fractional reserve, right?
Like let's say I have 100 Bitcoins in cold storage, but I have liabilities of 110 Bitcoin, a little bit higher than all of the assets that I have. As soon as you do that, your Bitcoins will start trading at a discount compared to regular Bitcoin because there's going to be more of them. And people will start accepting them at a discount. You know, if you're paying from that bank, your Bitcoin from that bank is 0.9 Bitcoins, you see? So I think this is just going to defeat the purpose. What's the purpose of printing 10% more Bitcoin if they're going to have 10% less value? So I think Mt. Gox was great in that sense because it taught people that lesson. Don't accept zero confirmation transactions. And don't accept second layers as being as good as the first layer. Always verify. If you're going to accept second layer payments, always do them from somebody who's been thoroughly trusted and verified and you know, audited and so on. So I think over time, you know, the market is capable of providing those solutions. And I think the decentralized nature of Bitcoin compared to gold will likely mean that it's far less likely for any one entity like the government to step in and just say, okay, we are going to print Bitcoin 2 and you're going to accept it on par with Bitcoin. I can't really see that happening in the digital world because they can't put a gun to you in the digital world. You can just log on to another website.
Yeah. I mean, as an analogy today, Coinbase and BitPay, I would today, possibly other people too, would accept a BitPay coin that they would vouch for. I can always spend it at their merchants, and it will be worth 1 Bitcoin. Maybe if it confirms instantly, then that's an advantage. But I think BitPay knows that this is a slippery slope and doesn't do it. And also they would fall into tons of regulation. So I think this is a great debate to have and a very important debate to have. And I don't think we can answer it fully today. So I think this is a good thing to keep in debate.
Absolutely,
so
I agree
I'm
entirely.
passing on the mic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this was an incredible talk. I really enjoyed it, and I want to thank the host here. The venue is incredible, and I'm enjoying the fresco of trade as it was in the time of, I guess, the Greeks or the Romans. Because part of what you discussed, and this is something that I think about quite a bit also, is adoption. And so the way that you framed it in terms of our psychology, current state in terms of people needing to find cash, and then they have this alternative. But by any chance on Monday at Consensus in New York, did you have a chance to listen to the St. Louis chair speak about his view on Bitcoin?
No.
I'd encourage you. Because this is the first instance that I can recall that someone from the Fed actually made a statement publicly. And in it, he talks about innovation, and he talks about Bitcoin being actually a healthy thing in the economy. So I encourage everyone to go to YouTube and dial it up, because it was quite a fascinating speech. But it is very much in line with this idea of adoption. So that was it.
Thank you. Maybe I'd like to add something, because we started with Austrian economics. It was actually the European Central Bank in their first paper about Bitcoin in 2012. They already explained it with Austrian economics, and it was amazing. It's amazing to read it because you can literally see the economists like writing. We've been looking for an explanation in our books, and we couldn't find any until we found those weird people from Austria, and here is an explanation of who they are and what they think about.
Yeah. I mean, let's, we give these people a lot more credit, but according to Keynesian and Marxist theories, money is a product of the state, so Bitcoin shouldn't exist. The mere fact that anybody in the world accepts Bitcoin, and the fact that, people sit and talk about it and treat it like it actually exists, flies in the face of all their theories, because in their theories, some people even believe that the only reason gold is money is because government made coins out of gold, which of course is the other way around. They could have made coins out of something cheaper. If the whole point was just having the picture of the king on it, why not just make it with something cheap? Obviously, it was the other way around. And I think the emergence of Bitcoin is a huge slap in the face of that theory, of the idea that money is just what the state accepts for taxes. In fact, as some governments are beginning to accept Bitcoin and taxes, we're seeing how the state theory of money is completely in reverse. The market chooses the money. Government will then have to accept it.
Please.
Yeah, thanks. Like you, I also think there's a high probability that Bitcoin will be the crypto standard store of value. But I'm not as dismissive as you is on the other currencies, on the other crypto assets. You mentioned how Bitcoin is impossible to change, and you mentioned how Bitcoin Cash was changing a lot. But I think just like Bitcoin Cash increased the block size, Bitcoin just chose to implement SegWit instead. So that was also a change of the protocol, and I think we will also see more changes in the future of the Bitcoin protocol. And then right now, Bitcoin is about 40% of the market value of all crypto coins. So if we look 10 years into the future, what probability in percentage would you put on this being the same or higher for Bitcoin in 10 years?
So in terms of Bitcoin changing for SegWit, the key distinction is that SegWit is a soft fork, which means that if you adopt SegWit, you would still be compatible with nodes that didn't adopt it. In other words, if you're running Bitcoin, if you were running your software from 2 years ago, you haven't touched it, you haven't upgraded it, and you ran it today, it would sync with the Bitcoin network, not with the Bitcoin Cash network, even if you are not using SegWit, right? So SegWit is essentially a user-based upgrade because it requires nothing of the network. You're still in sync with the network. You can still sync with the network without the rest of the people in the network having to make an upgrade. And I think this is really the key distinction. A soft fork is a change that doesn't require others to do anything. A hard fork is a change where everybody has to move. And so everybody moving is really what can change the entire nature of the coin. Now, on the question of the market cap, I honestly don't think the market cap means anything, because you and I could program a Bitcoin, what do we call it? They've used every ridiculous name out there, but you know, Bitcoin 7.0, 3.2, let's call it. We could just program it right now, and we make 10 trillion coins, and I sell you one coin for $10. Here you go. Well, the market cap of my stupid coin is now $100 trillion. That's quote Dr. Evil. And so Bitcoin's market cap has now become what now? What's Bitcoin's dominance now? It's 0.05% of the entire crypto market. Doesn't mean anything. You know, thousands of these coins are being created daily, and the market, in terms of the liquidity of them, is very, very tiny. Now we're at a point in the business cycle in general, in the economy overall, where the money is very easy. This is like 2005 or 2006, where, you know, housing is rising and the price of everything goes up and everything is returning very high investments. So, you know, it's possible for you and I with $10,000 to create a liquid, semi-liquid market, get it listed on a couple of exchanges and so on. And then it looks like we have a coin with a $100 million market cap over a few weeks of work. But of course, you know, as long as we have our money playing in that system, we can keep it going. But, you know, if we want to get our money out, then it comes crashing down. And I think, you know, if you look at this history of business cycles, it's easy money, and then when interest rates rise, everybody scrambles to go for the things that are the highest liquidity. We haven't seen that yet happen in the digital world, but I think when it gets to it, and eventually perhaps it will, you know, people are going to seek the things, people are not going to be looking for the thing that offers the highest return. They're not going to be speculating. They're going to be searching for the thing that offers the highest safety and the highest liquidity. And that's when, you know, that's when that's what's going to separate the men from the boys, if you want. At that point, you know, your coin that is listed on 2 exchanges in Korea and, you know, has a market cap of 100 million, suddenly that exchange has gone bankrupt and your coin doesn't work anymore and it's gone. And the people who have it are just trying their best to sell it to get into Bitcoin. So I don't think the market cap is a very meaningful metric because it can be gained, but also on a very fundamental level, I don't think it's meaningful because you can put all the coins together as being digital assets, crypto assets, projects, whatever innovations that people are playing with, whatever they want to do. But Bitcoin is different. It's a completely different project. Bitcoin is competing not with these coins, it's competing with the dollar and euro and Swiss franc and the IMF SDR and gold for international payment settlement. That's Bitcoin's market competition. It's not competing for smart contracts. It's not competing for all of these use cases that are being advertised by all these other coins. So I don't really see it as being a useful metric.
Thank you.
One question regarding the inflation issue. There is a lot of coins missing from Satoshi. Couldn't this work as a hidden inflation?
It could. We may yet see Satoshi come out tomorrow and say, surprise, I have 1 million coins, now they're worth, what, $8 billion?
He might be in the room.
Yeah, he might be in the room. And, you know, he might just go and buy himself a small little country and run it. Or, but you know what? He only has 1 billion coins. That's 1 million, or that's the most that he could probably have by any estimate. So that's still 5%. And if he starts spending it on buying himself his own little country and his own little army or whatever, he's not going to have any more coins left. It's problem solved. So, I mean, for me, it doesn't matter, to go back to the inequality issue, it really doesn't matter how much toys other people have, as long as they can't take my toys, you know, as long as they can't print, they don't have this magical machine that takes the value of my toys and puts it in theirs. So, yes, Satoshi could surprise us. He could turn out to just have done this as a way to get rich, and he could dump his coins, and maybe if he dumps the coins, the price drops all the way down to $100 or something like that. But will it affect Bitcoin fundamentally in the long run? I don't think so. In fact, if it happens, yeah, discounted coins, we can all buy cheap coins at $100 again, and then, you know, we start over again from the 100 and we start running again, but now we don't have to worry about Satoshi anymore.
Saif, I agree with most you said, but allow me to challenge a little bit further your Bitcoin maximalism. I wonder, to something being a standard, there seems to be more than just one aspect. And of course, a very important aspect is being a standard of settlements, thus being extinguisher of debt. And I think you seem to focus on that mostly. But a second aspect seems to be a standard for economic calculation, on which Hayek in his denationalization of money focused on exclusively, which led him to this monetarist kind scheme. And I think maybe a third aspect of a standard is being the generally accepted medium of exchange, which I'm not so sure theoretically if those different aspects always converge. So I'm wondering, are you sure that those aspects will converge, or do you see any place for something else than Bitcoin fulfilling, maybe just for a time, as silver next to gold fulfilling to a better degree another aspect of that standard? And may there not even be use cases for blockchain-based tokens that have nothing to do with being a standard? We talked about anonymity before, but just the idea of tokenized certificates replacing shares and so on doesn't seem to be entirely related to this standard idea.
Okay, a lot of questions there. Let me first begin by the first one, Hayek's denationalization of money. So Hayek, towards the end, when he started saying, you know, I don't think gold would work as money, and what we need is private competing currencies, I don't find that convincing at all. I think, you know, his idea was that we would have a currency, and then you'd have, and the issuer of the currency backing it with other commodities, and they could choose whatever commodities so that they would guarantee the price. But I think, I mean, if anybody but Hayek said this, I would tell them, go read Hayek. So it's kind of problematic, because, you know, fundamentally, how do you, how do you place the things in the basket? But then if the price of those things goes up or goes down, and if it becomes the monetary medium itself, it will drive the production of those things itself. So if your basket is 30% copper, well, now copper is 30% of money. The production of copper is going to continue to increase until the value of your copper drops. In other words, actually, let me put it this way. Maybe Hayek was just doing this as a Trojan horse, because I think the real outcome of that competition is if we had free market where everybody was making their own currency backed by different commodities, there will be one winner, and that will be the free market provider whose currency is backed by gold. Previously, back at Hayek's day. Maybe this was just his Trojan horse. He was saying, you know, let's have a free market, and he knew that gold would win. Maybe not. Maybe he really believed it. It's immaterial what he actually thought. But I think the reason gold won the monetary competition will not be annulled if you just had gold-backed instruments. So I think the same thing would happen. The second thing you asked in terms of what was it?
Other use cases than being a standard,
yes,
like tokens.
I mean, I've written a paper specifically about this, and it's a stupid thing to do because I'm trying to prove a negative, but so far it's held up pretty well. I mean, when I wrote this in 2014, I said, it may just be that the only use case for this blockchain technology is digital cash, and it may just be that the only workable digital cash for various historical reasons and economic incentive, that the only one that will actually be workable as physical cash is Bitcoin, and that's it. It might just be the case. And it looks like it, because all the other examples, I mean, there comes a point after you've spent hours trying to look at what is this structure of, you know, people are talking about putting stock markets on the blockchain, or putting identity on the blockchain, or putting real estate on the blockchain, or putting healthcare records. After a few hours of looking at all of these, you know, you get to a point where, you know, this doesn't make any sense. And then after seeing a few hundreds of them, they start looking a lot like the Nigerian prince emails that ask you to send them $10,000 and then they'll send you 15 million. I mean, I can't prove that if you keep replying to those Nigerian princes, I can't prove that one of them is not going to send you $15 million one day. There's definitely no way to prove that. Don't ask me to send my money, however. And I mean, this is a little bit of a joke of just sort of a meta way of understanding it, a sort of shortcut heuristic. But if you really want to look at it more concretely, a blockchain is a very complicated, bulky, expensive thing, and whose only advantage is that it allows us to move its own token, only its own token, without having to trust anybody. So we're burning all this electricity that Bitcoin burns, just so that when I move my Bitcoin to you, It moves to you, and it doesn't rely on anybody in the world. That's it. Now, I struggle to see, number one, I struggle to see any case where it would be so important for a transaction to be so trustless when it is attached to anything other than the token itself. In other words, if we're going to put real estate claims on the blockchain, making them immutable so that nobody changes, okay, what happens if I lose my private key to my house? Is the house gone forever? Is this going to be there? What if I lock myself in the house and I lost my private key? Am I going to just let myself starve there and not let anybody break the door and let me out? Obviously not. You know, at the end of the day, the private property in the house is going to be enforced by somebody with a gun or with a tank or with something, and they can break the house down and they can destroy the entire house. And guess what? Your blockchain is powerless in front of them. It can't do anything. The blockchain can just move its own little token. It can't tell you that this token is belonging to that house, and no, don't go into that house. It's powerless on top of that. So then, if you're running a blockchain for housing records, it's still dependent on the person enforcing the housing property rights, whether it's the police or whatever. So why do you need all of this elaborate structure? And over time, you see that every single one of them is the same. And then the only thing that the blockchain can really do, that's it, is just moving its own native token. And it has to be its own native token because it has to be the one that rewards the miners. Because if the miners are getting rewarded in anything else, they have no incentive to maintain the integrity of the network. So all of these different pieces of the Bitcoin economic incentive puzzle, they fit together perfectly. Remove one of them, and the whole thing falls apart. So I can't really see any other use cases, and I've not really seen any that have been convincing. And after a while, I've made this call, which is, nope, I don't see them. And at this point, you know, I don't argue about this anymore because I'm just waiting to see one commercial application of these things. It's astonishing. I've never seen anything get so much funding with so little output. I mean, billions have been spent on producing blockchain technology stuff, and yet Bitcoin is the only application. And all the other digital coins, to the extent that they do anything else, is just essentially copying the properties of Bitcoin. I mean, no coin has really innovated anything beyond the whole, you have a private key and you have a public key, and then there's a common ledger. That's really it. And that's the only thing that a blockchain can do. People would like to believe that, you know, we can just use it for all these other things. That whole meme of Bitcoin doesn't matter, but the blockchain technology thing does. Doesn't work. It's not how it works. It's the exact other way around. Blockchain technology is just a technical term that wasn't even used by anybody that refers to some sort of a structure within the way that makes Bitcoin work. It's only significant because it makes Bitcoin work. It's a cog in the Bitcoin machine. It's not the technology that can just be transferred to everything else. It's not the steam engine. It's not the internal combustion engine. But again, this is one of those things that only time will tell. So we'll see.
Okay, we have one more question in the back, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Good evening. Today, Mr. Andreas Antonopoulos was in Vienna, and he mentioned the importance of an open blockchain in comparison to a closed one, or private, or corrupt, or state-run. So my question is, how do you see the possibility of a crypto euro or crypto dollar? Can this actually happen? Can the member states of the EU really pull this off? Or do they only arguing and speaking and talking, and at the end of the day, they will never pull it off because they are incapable of it? So how do you see the possibility? And if we have a crypto euro, what do you think will be the acceptance among the people, and will it help Bitcoin, or will it be bad for Bitcoin?
I fundamentally don't think these projects of government-run cryptos can work, not because governments can't pull them off, just because they're completely unworkable from an engineering design. And the reason is very specific. The way that a cryptocurrency works is that the transaction is determined, the validity of the transaction is determined through cryptography, right? If you have the coins and you have the right private key, nothing in the world can stop you from moving your coins to my account, right? So And secondly, that the monetary policy is determined algorithmically, that there's no central bank sitting there and increasing the money supply and determining it, and that there's an algorithm that does that. Now, what is the raison d'etre of a central bank? Why do we even have central banks? It's precisely for those two things. Central banks want to stop you from making a payment if they want to stop it, and they want to be able to control the inflation and the issuance of the currency, to finance government, to whatever goals you want. But, you know, agree or disagree with these goals or not is besides the point. The point is that's what a central bank is for. They want to control transaction clearing, and they want to control monetary supply. So the notion that a central bank will build a cryptocurrency which neuters them, which removes from them the ability to control the transaction settlement and the monetary supply, I find to be completely self-defeating. I mean, if they really got to a point where they want to neuter themselves like that, they'll just use Bitcoin. And if they're going to continue, if they want to keep those forces, well, you know, the euro is, what, 70, 80% digital already? It's not that big of a difference. So the notion of making the euro a cryptocurrency by adding cryptography, it's either going to be a meaningless gimmick, or it's going to, if it's carried out, it's going to completely disempower central banks. So I can't see them ever pulling it off.
But in order to compete with cryptocurrencies and with Bitcoin, don't government currencies need to provide you the option of having your own private key and your own public key, and, you know, circumventing the banks?
I mean, I guess there's in my book, there's a section towards the end called How to Kill Bitcoin, a Beginner's Guide. And I go through a bunch of scenarios of how Bitcoin could be killed. And most of them you hear on the news, you know, 51% attack or something or the other. And I don't find any of the common attacks against Bitcoin to be a convincing possibility, for one very important reason. And I'm not a programmer, and I'm not very good at technical issues, but I see the one problem with all of these things is that what is needed to destroy Bitcoin is against the economic incentives of many, many, many people who will act against it. That's really what protects Bitcoin, is the fact that the economic incentive for people to use it drives them to innovate and find solutions and workarounds for whatever problems that others want to do for it. And so, while writing the book, I came up with, and you know, thinking this chapter through, I came up with what I think is maybe the most credible threat to Bitcoin. If you really wanted to kill Bitcoin, I think the answer is not to attack it or destroy it or to put people in jail or all that stuff. All of that stuff is just feeding Bitcoin. Because remember, Bitcoin, I mean, as Andreas himself calls it, it's the rat sewer. It's lived and grown off of all of these horrible things. And the more horrible things you do to it, the stronger it becomes. But you know what would really annoy the rat sewer? Put him in a 5-star hotel and clean him up, and then, you know, that's not his, that's a bad analogy. What I mean is, the way that you could kill the demand for Bitcoin is not to try and fight it, but to try to kill the economic incentives for it, to try to kill the reason that people want to use it. So, if you think Bitcoin is about cheap transactions or all of those things, then, you know, make business credit card fees lower. But I don't think that's the case. I think people use Bitcoin to escape inflation and to escape government control of money. So if you want to kill Bitcoin, I think a return to the 19th century gold standard, perhaps with added cryptographic security so that the central bank can't interfere with your supply. So, you know, they can't manage the money supply because the money supply is gold, and they can't manage your crypto. They can't tell you who to send your money to because it's all cryptographically determined by the validity of the private key. I think if governments moved towards that, it would seriously undermine demand for Bitcoin. I don't know if it would kill it, though, because I still think in the long run, the hardness of producing it will likely mean it will probably outcompete gold in the long run. Maybe. I don't know. It's impossible to make such predictions. But I think if you wanted to kill Bitcoin, this is probably your best bet. Gold and cryptography and going back to sound monetary system. And the advantage, or the case that I could make for why this could kill Bitcoin, is that, well, gold is far more distributed over the planet. Far more people know it. Far more people trust it and believe in it and understand it and have touched it. And then there are people who understand how Bitcoin works. Then there are people who can even begin to understand what it means for there to be digital money and cryptography and private keys and all of that stuff. And maybe that 6,000-year first mover advantage, maybe that might be enough to supplant the Bitcoin sort of faster confirmation times for Bitcoin transactions as opposed to gold transactions. But who knows? What we know is they're not going to try that for sure.
Well, I think that was a pretty good closing statement. We can maybe agree on meeting each other when you write your next book. You can start. You can start. The return of the gold standard. How I didn't see that coming, or something like that.
Yes.
No.
I did see that coming.
You did see that. Yeah, exactly. That's the first chapter.